Today is going to be a total adventure, that is for sure. After overcoming drug addiction, a diagnosis of PTSD after the war in Iraq, and a battle with alcohol that pushed him to the brink of suicide, which we discussed today, Akshay has since explored the most hostile environments on the planet and built a global business helping people live limitless lifestyles. Akshay NANAVATI is here with us today, and he combines years of research in neuroscience and psychology with his life experience. And he wrote this book called Fearvana, the revolutionary science of how to turn fear into health, wealth, and happiness. Now, I wanted to have Akshay join us because, one, he was nominated to the show by a previous guest and a Bare Naked Bravery community member, David Shriner-Cahn. Hi, David. Two, we have not featured a perspective of PTSD yet on the show, and I really appreciate Akshay's particular experience and his journey through this. Number three, the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama wrote the foreword to his book, and I really wanted to know how that came about. So I think you'll really enjoy this conversation. And so let's make like a skydiver. Wink. See what I did there? Let's make like a skydiver and jump on into this. You're listening to Bare Naked Bravery, a weekly podcast hosted by me, Emily Ann Peterson. As a singer-songwriter, author, teaching artist, and creative entrepreneur, I encounter some really fascinating stories. I'm on a mission to reveal the depth and width of bravery and its benefits to creatives like yourself. More than ever today, our world needs bravery, unique bravery, from everyone. This is the place where you find it. There is no script or censorship today because that's how these facets of Bare Naked Bravery are in real life. So if you're listening with little ears nearby, please know that some episodes may contain mature language and subject matter. One of the easiest ways you can share bravery with the world is to send this episode to a friend or two. Send them an email, text, or tweet. Tag them in one of my Instagram posts. My handle is Emily Ann Pete. Or leave us a review on iTunes. It takes seconds and can be done from your phone right now. Again, we need more bravery in the world, so let's be brave together. So Akshay, I am really, truly excited about having this conversation with you because on the show, we've not talked about a lot of these subjects we've talked about the big meta subjects of fear and how to use it a lot. We talk about that a lot, but we haven't talked a lot about specifically how that shows up in PTSD and what the hell you do when you are triggered by something that brings up a lot of fear and anxiety. Mm-hmm. So can you please give us a little bit of a background on what brought you to the point of your PTSD diagnosis?
Sure, absolutely. So when I got back from Iraq in 2008, and when I got back, I immediately struggled with life back home. I went back to my senior year of undergrad, and I immediately wanted to go back to war. I volunteered to try to go back to Afghanistan, go back to Iraq. I struggled with life in the normal world, and especially in college. You know, you come back and kids are complaining about silly things that that kind of don't make sense when you came back from a war zone, and people out there have no food, have no water. They've lived under oppressive regimes for forever. And, at the time I didn't have the awareness that I do now, so I was very judgmental about it. And in all fairness, you can't judge somebody for having the awareness they do. I mean, they haven't been to war. It's not their fault, right? But at the time I couldn't handle it. So, but I went to college. I tried volunteering. It didn't end up happening. Then I had 1 year left in the Marines. So I went to master's program, which is where I met my wife. I did my master's in journalism. So life was kind of starting to progress at that point. When I met her, I decided, okay, I'm going to get out of the Marines. And got a corporate job. And then slowly it kind of all started to hit. I think, and I've actually heard this happens to a lot of people, it hits them many years later. And when I was married after with my wife, we were going through some issues, and finally she said, "Okay, look, something's going on. It's not. I mean, I'll be, I guess, very upfront about it. We were going through some issues physically, and turns out it wasn't like, I mean, not turns out, I was kind of new. It wasn't anything physically wrong. It was a psychological issue. So she said, she kind of pushed me to say, okay, go get it checked out, and I was very resistant, and that's when I went to the VA therapist, and they diagnosed me with PTSD. And I was drinking at the time, but I never really saw it as a problem in the sense that, I would party and drink, but I was still a functioning alcoholic in the sense that I was still had a job and then eventually I quit and I started running my business. I was still training, running a lot, but it got to the point when I eventually started realizing it's a serious problem.
What was the thing that made you realize, or was there a specific moment where you were like, oh shit, this is going to be a big deal. Like I need to.
Yeah, so I used to drink my problem for a long time was that when I drank a lot. So it's not that I drank every day, but when I did drink, I would get like blackout drunk. And sometimes when bad things, whatever triggers would lead me to these binges of doing this for 4 or 5 days in a row. And needless to say, that's not very healthy. And so it actually the trigger that finally led to the research and the healing my brain and everything that even actually led up to this concept of Fearvana was when I actually after a 5-day binge, I just woke up thinking, and I still remember, it was actually downstairs in my living room. The sun hit me. It was, I think, 6 a.m. or whatever. And I still remember thinking that there's no point going on because this pattern of drinking and sobering up is never going to end. And so when that thought even hit me, I mean, the only reason I remember it because that thought was so shocking that I would even think that, like that I would think of taking my own life. That triggered something in me that something really needed to change, that like I could even think about taking my own life. And that started that was the trigger that led me to this to that, there was this obviously some lows after that. I mean, the truth is after that I still dove back out into the pit, but that was a trigger that said, okay, something really needs to start changing. And that's when I slowly started taking the steps in the right direction in terms of reading neuroscience, studying psychology, studying spirituality, to heal my own brain and figure out what does it really take to live a meaningful and happy and peaceful life.
Yeah, my own history with an eating disorder had a very similar pivotal moment of, if I keep going in this direction, I will die. Like, not a choice, but I will die. Like, like this collection of habits and this cycle that I'm going through is a downward spiral. Yeah. And I didn't feel in control of it at all. Let's talk a little bit about, because I'm fine talking about politics if you are. What is it about your story that brought on the PTSD, do you think?
I guess, see, the truth is, even before I went to Iraq, I mean, long time before I even joined the Marines, I was struggled with drugs for about a year and a half in high school. I lost 2 friends to drug addiction. And when we got into that phase, I was the first person in my group to go from marijuana to hard drugs, me and one other guy. But I was like the instigator of that. And then eventually a bunch of them got into it, and it spiraled badly for a lot of people. And I was easily headed down the path. I mean, I was in the phase of my life that I would have done any drug that came my way. And that's obviously not a good thing. And thankfully, a lot of those drugs didn't come my way. But the point is that I think that I was always this kind of person that sought out these extremes, these highs. And so when I got out of drugs, I joined the Marines. And in my time in the Marines, I started seeking out positive ways to look for these highs. So I went mountaineering in the Himalayas. I went glacier caving, ice diving, cave diving. I mean, you name it, Also
an adrenaline junkie.
Exactly. So yeah, I wanted, I was always pushing myself in these very extreme ways. And I think partly I joke with my friends that I was messed up in the head before I went to Iraq, So I think that in some sense, war was another, separate from the politics of it, the actual experience of war is an adrenaline high. That's what it is. It's an adrenaline experience. Except there's obviously a lot more brutality and that stuff that comes along with it. But just that experience is very intense. And so in some ways that was, you're spending 7 months out there, that when I came back, it's hard readjusting. I mean, I struggle with readjusting to the world after spending a month in Greenland, for example. I spent a month on skiing across the Greenland ice cap, and it was hard readjusting to the normal, complicated world, So I think that I was very prone to these issues before I even went to Iraq, which is why ultimately I rejected that diagnosis of PTSD. I came to realize that just because I jump when there's loud noises doesn't mean it's a disorder. That's a very normal human response to war, where you live in a world where 7 months where loud noises equals death, and your brain learns to make that association. And same thing with crowds. Obviously you don't like crowds, you're you're hyper vigilant when you come back from Iraq, and it's not. So these are all things that we have now attached the label disorder to. Like, the symptoms of post-traumatic stress are not indicative of a disorder. Those are natural human responses to any kind of trauma, not just war. And I think by reframing it from a disorder, I learned to say that this is just a normal thing. And by removing that label, I avoided spiraling into that downward spiral of disorder, because what happens is then anytime something shows up, oh, there's something wrong with me. That fuels a sense of self-identity, which fuels this belief about you, who you are, and it spirals downwards. And I learned to get out of that spiral by kind of figuring out that the brain doesn't control what first shows up. We don't control what first shows up in the brain, and all these things are just natural responses because the brain learns to adapt to the world around it. And you can choose what you make those responses mean.
I totally agree with you, because my own experience with an eating quote unquote disorder, I'll use the quotation marks for this episode, for this conversation. It was what I needed to do to survive the situation that I was in when I started adopting those habits and rituals and crazy things. And honestly, to some degree, it's what caused me to survive, right? So those were coping mechanisms that I used to get through and work and function within my environment, right? And we don't have a lot of control over it, right? I didn't wake up one day and choose to hey, this sounds like a great idea.
Yeah.
Let's go mistreat my body. That sounds like a fantastic idea. So I really stand by that it makes so much sense that if you are to come back from a really stressful, high adrenaline environment, that your body and everything and your mind and your spirit and everything is really just on edge.
Exactly. Yeah.
So how did that on edge sensation show up in your life, even up to, you said, many years later? What did that look like?
So I kept seeking out that high, so in 2000, so 4 years after coming back home, right when I got back from Iraq, I went mountaineering in the Himalayas. I went climbing Kilimanjaro, climbing in India. That was literally right when I got back. So needless to say, I put my mom through a lot of hell. My parents, they were not pleased with my lifestyle, or they were very on edge about it. So after that, I still did these things. I went climbing again in the Himalayas years later. In 2012, I spent 1 month skiing 350 miles across the world's second largest ice cap. And eventually, though, I came to learn that these things, even though they're positive, they're not alcohol, they're not drugs. So when you share this with the world, they're oh, he's doing these amazing things. But even these things can be a way to run away from yourself, So I've come to learn that. And it's not that I don't want to do these things anymore, but I do it now from a very different level of consciousness. It's not a running away. It's a seeking, it's a continued growth, but it's not running away from something. And that's what I came to learn, is that, these adrenaline highways, I was constantly seeking it out, but in some sense, I was just running away from stillness. And I now learned, I'm still working on it. My greatest fear continues to be stillness, but I'm learning to embrace stillness and then still channel it into something, these other things. So it's not that I want to stop running, stop climbing mountains and all that, but it's from a very different level of consciousness.
When you came back from the war and from Himalayas and all of these adrenaline situations, and you found yourself in places of stillness, were those your triggering moments of reacting strangely or?
Yeah, often I would rarely find myself in those moments because I did everything to avoid them. I would if I wasn't drinking, I would be consumed by work, or I would go running, and then I would even consumed by work. What would happen is I would work, and burn myself out, and then drink for a couple. You know what I mean? And it would. So I would never give myself the moment to be still. I would always be doing something. And until I kind of started figuring this all out. And it's been a long journey, because after I hit that low moment with drinking, I learned to moderate it better. So I started moderating my alcohol. But it was Memorial Day last year that I finally quit. And I still remember, because that's when I hit another binge, and watching a war movie triggered me into a 5-day binge. And I just said, you know what? No more. Moderation's not working for me. Because again, I was functioning, right? My business was growing, things were going good in all that sense. I was happily married, still running, all that stuff, very fit. But again, it would, and I would moderate it better. I'd be able to go out and have a few beers and not the end of the world. But every once in a while, it would just some trigger would push me into these binges. And finally on one binge, I said, what am I doing? Like, because you're not losing 5 days with alcohol. You're losing the 3 days of recovery. I mean, you're losing a week of your life. And I've tasted my own mortality. I've experienced death. Like, what am I doing? Why do I want to waste a week of my life? I mean, if I'm doing this every 6 months, that ends up being like months of my life by the end of my years that could be channeled to something meaningful, something purposeful. So finally that just triggered. And then that's when I started actively engaging. Okay, what's it going to take to be sober? And that's when it finally hit, was Memorial Day last year.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about triggers for a wee bit, because I think there's a lot of, that has some to do, it's like the peripheral area of fear, right? We know what we're afraid of. Oftentimes we know what we're afraid of without actually being in the midst of that fear, right? So like, I'm afraid of clowns, as an example. I'm not afraid of clowns. I think they're kind of silly, but I know a lot of people are. So a lot of people choose to not be triggered by them by not going to the crazy movies with them in it, right? Mm-hmm. Or they avoid circuses, or they they close their eyes at certain moments. So there's that like behavioral choice to avoid the trigger. Mm-hmm. But what do you do if you're afraid of a lot of things? Then your whole life is just sidestepping your fears and your triggers. Mm-hmm. And that sounds like a hair-raising mess of a stressful way to live your life.
Yeah, I think a big thing when you're engaging your fear is to remember the consequences of not living a life without risk. Like you could live your whole life without, let's say, meeting a clown and whatever, right? Like, but if you're not choosing to engage your fears of, let's say, writing that book, getting your message out there, quitting that job you hate, running that marathon, all those things, and you think and you reframe that and think about, what if I don't do these things? What if I died never having lived this life? Like, that's a scarier thought to me. And often what happens is we get so paralyzed by fear of this thing that we forget about the fear of not doing that thing, that the risk of not doing that thing. And it kind of reframes it, because ultimately, right, at the very core, we do things to avoid pain or gain pleasure. And we just have to look at reframe that dynamic of what pain is. I mean, it took me years to write my book, for example. Part of it was procrastination. Part of it was just brought up my demons. Part of it, ironically, writing a book about fear was scary, because the whole time you're thinking, is this going to be any good? Is it garbage? Are people going to like it? But finally, it's that recognition that, like, what if I die tomorrow and I don't get my message out there? Or like, what if I never write this book that I've been talking about? And, and that was like, okay, I got better get my act together. So kind of reframing how you view pain and what the pain point is. And like you said, when you hit that low moment with your eating disorder, it was that drove you, and avoiding pain can be such a strong motivator. And I think we should use that. Like, I choose never to forget that low moment where I was, suicidal. I don't want to let that slide, because that pain can be such a strong driver to stay focused. And it's the same thing with all my experiences in war. I choose to harness and embrace that pain.
Yeah.
There's a new class in the horizon. I want to make sure that you know about it. It's called Guts, because us creatives really do need the guts to get stuff out there and into the public. And that's what the class is about. We're just going to take 6 weeks and take one of your unfinished projects and have it go from start all the way to out there. And all the while, we will be applying these concepts that you're hearing about in Bare Naked Bravery all the time. These 12 ingredients of bravery. We're going to apply those to your unfinished project and then put your project out there. It's kind of awesome. And you're going to do that with a group of people. So I know from experience that by being part of a class that is live as opposed to pre-recorded and quote unquote evergreen, I know that it is really important to be involved, and it makes so much of a difference to have an active group of people, a small group of people to help you go through the things that are tough, like putting your work out into the world. So if this interests you, go to barenakedbravery.com/guts, and you can reserve your seat for the next time Guts is available and next time we're doing registration. It's exciting. It is worth it. It is sometimes terrifying, but that's okay, because that's what your group of classmates is for. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the group if that interests you. And if you have any questions, go ahead and shoot me an email, It's just me on the other side. I'd be happy to chat with you a little further if you have any questions about it. barenakedbravery.com/guts. Let's get back to the conversation.
So your book is about fear. It's called Fearvana. And you talk a lot about what it is like to use your fear instead of avoiding your fear, which is something that I'm such a huge advocate for. In the Bare Naked Bravery community, we've got 3 ingredients of bravery. One is vulnerability, and we have imagination, and then improvisation. And fear can be within all 3 of those from a varying degree, But one of the big elements of vulnerability and improvisation is the notion that you have constraints in your life and you have friction, right? So you have constraints like you only have $500 in your bank account. That's a constraint, right? Mm-hmm. You have friction like, but the bill is due in 10 days, and that's frictions. So you have these 2 elements of constraint rubbing against each other, causing friction, causing stress in your life. And for some people, that also means it's causing fear, right? So in my dictionary, fear is a version of friction. Fear is just friction. And as a musician, I know that friction is a good thing because you can use friction to make sounds that are really beautiful or really awful or really impactful or powerful, right?
Yeah,
so
I like that.
Yeah, so that's my version of fear. What's your version of fear? Like, what's your take on it?
I think it shows up anywhere and everywhere. We're often not clear on what it shows, where it shows up, and we're easily victimized by the environment around us. That is very fear creating, right? I mean, fear sells. That's what marketers do. They'll scare you into X so you can buy stuff. I mean, quick example of how, like, for example, the movie The Day After Tomorrow. Have you seen that, like, end of the world movie?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. I mean, the science in it is absolutely ridiculous. The movie itself is not, at least in my opinion, I didn't think it was that good. But they did studies, and people were more scared about global warming after that movie than they were before. So this is a fictional movie with, like, ludicrous science that yet generates a response of fear in people about global warming. So the point is, we're being bombarded with fear things all the time. And it's really important, it's essential to step outside of ourselves to say, where is this fear? What's causing this fear? So we're not victimized by that subconscious brain, which we all human beings operate from a greater place of subconscious than consciousness, right? Like, our brain lives on autopilot. And it's up to us to step outside of that to get awareness. I mean, you turn on the news, right? What is that? It's generating entire fear about the world. So a quick story about how I learned to transform this fear. So when I went running across Barbados, right before going, I somehow stumbled into a story about a person who was robbed in Barbados, a tourist who was robbed. So now that is living in my brain about everything about Barbados is that story, right? So I go running in the country and I get lost. My first response is leading to that thought. Oh my God, this tourist got robbed. I'm lost somewhere. I'm probably going to get robbed and stabbed and all this stuff. But I was very aware of this. So I stepped outside of it and I kind of engage the risk, and partly was just it's become habitual to engage risk because of the lifestyle that I lead. So I stopped and asked somebody about directions. The guy was super friendly, directed me the right way. Met somebody else on the way to kind of confirm. And this cop, he was a cop, and I tend to have a bad history of cops because I've been arrested a lot in my misspent youth. So immediately that trigger is still there. But I stopped, asked him again, super friendly. So suddenly what happens is that reframes that whole experience. So I was dominated by this fear response, but now I've realized that people in Barbados are not going to kill me and rob me, right? Like, they're awesome people. And the thing is, we surround ourselves by so much negativity, it ingrains fear. So part of it is removing those environmental elements, like don't watch news, which at this point I know a lot of people talk about in the personal development world. And if you do want to watch it to know what's happening in the world, be present to what that's doing to you so you can step outside of it, So I don't like to surround myself with that negativity for sure. And then saying, what am I truly afraid of? So you can kind of do like a fear audit. What's scary about writing my book? Oh, I know I'm going to get at least one-star review on Amazon, right? Now I'm at least mentally ready for that. And it's probably going to hurt me more than the 25-star reviews I get, right? I mean, that's normal, right? right? We focus more on the negativity than the positivity. But if you're ready for it, you can at least say, okay, cool, I know it's going to happen. So you kind of prepare for all the things that are scary, all the things that are scary of not taking action, and then you can say, what can I do with this fear now? So it's not about eliminating it. It's just simply channeling it and saying, so I'm not ever trying to get rid of my fears. It's saying, okay, if whatever fear shows up, even if it's something silly, cool, it shows up. What do I do with it? Because the more you judge your fears and the more you say this fear is stupid, the more you try to fight it and resist it and it just doesn't work, as opposed to channeling it into something meaningful. And then your brain actually biologically releases chemicals that help you enhance the fear.
Yeah, I'm raising both hands because I totally stand by that. I think, if we are able to manage our own expectations that fear is going to exist, not that it might not be there. We might not be afraid if we go do this scary thing.
Mm-hmm.
If you go through it knowing I am going to feel scared out of my mind,
mm-hmm.
then it makes the process a little bit easier to rip that Band-Aid off, to go like, this is going to hurt. Okay. And you rip it off, you do the thing. What are some tangible tips or tricks? Tips or tricks. That sounds so hokey. For what can you do in the moment when you are when you're looking at the monster or it's breathing down your neck and you can smell what it had for dinner? What do you do with that fear?
So a very simple thing, and this almost sounds too simple, sometimes we look for the complicated ones, but a very simple solution is actually label the emotion. So I'm feeling scared, I'm feeling nervous, I'm feeling anxious, stress. And they've shown, neuroscience has shown that when you label an emotion, it reduces activity in the subconscious parts of the brain and increases activity in the parts of the brain related to focus and awareness. So now you're no longer victimized by the emotion, but you're saying, what can I do with it? Another step is simply then assigning a meaning to that emotion. So why am I scared? So it's getting clear on the meaning, because our brains are always finding meanings to everything. So I actually have a little tool called LMNOP. So the L is label, and the second part of that L is language. So you shift your body language into a more empowered. Amy Cuddy has a great TED talk about power poses, and you shift into a powerful pose, and it changes your physiology and biology as well. So L is label and language. M is meaning. So what is the meaning to the event that you have assigned that's either causing that emotion, or what is the meaning to the emotion? So, for example, I can say the meaning to the emotion of why I'm scared is because I actually care about my book making an impact. If I wasn't, then why would I be scared? Because who cares, right? It could just be garbage. And so all of a sudden I'm reframing my fear to make it mean that it's something positive, right? The N is a very important part. The N is, it's not me, it's my brain. So you're literally saying, this is not me. This is just my brain acting in a pattern outside my control. And this is huge because we define ourselves by emotions. I worked with this one teenager who was diagnosed with depression. The therapist labeled her depressed. So now anytime she felt sad, she was like, oh, it's because I am depressed. It's because I have depression. So that became part of her self-identity, as opposed to saying something like, oh, this is not me. This is just my brain acting in a state of sadness from time to time, but my brain is not me, right? And I am not my brain kind of thing. So that's the end part. The O is you opt for a new meaning. So this is when you're getting aware of meaning and choosing an empower meaning. Initially, it won't stick. Your brain's going to be stuck in those patterns. But this part is at least choosing to create a new meaning. And in time, those meanings will become real, right? As you build new habitual patterns. And finally, P is purpose and preemptive strikes. So you're taking some action in line with your purpose. And it has to be something different than you usually do. Because if you do something different, even if it's something small, then it'll rewire your brain. So you'll actually be creating new, physical structures in your brain. This neuroplasticity, how your brain changes itself. So I worked with a client, for example, who used to get paralyzed every time he sat on a computer to write, and he would retreat to watch TV. So we went through these LMNOP steps, and the P step for him was just writing for 5 minutes, not a lot, but just 5 minutes, even if it was just 2 minutes initially, just to rewire that brain. And the second part of the P is what I call preemptive strikes, and this is kind of what we were talking about earlier, is where you preemptively prepare for obstacles you know will show up. So, for example, one morning I woke up, I had 2 client calls, and I had a 5-mile run scheduled. But I knew that after those 2 client calls, I would be really tired because I hadn't slept much at night. So to prepare for it, to preemptively prepare for my fatigue, I put on my running shoes, I wore my iPod around my arm, I put on my GPS running watch. I was as ready to go for a run. So when I finished my client calls, I made it as psychologically easy just to step out the door, because otherwise those extra barriers, even though they might seem small to put on your running shorts and shoes, is enough to tell yourself, you know what? I'll just go take a nap. So that's one specific tool.
I've totally been there where you're like, oh,
Yeah.
Netflix is so much easier.
Exactly. And, actually, Nobel Prize winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman, in his great book, Thinking Fast and Slow, talks about how our brain is naturally lazy and we all will retreat to the easiest course of action. He says laziness, and I quote, is built deep into our nature. So by being aware of that natural state of laziness, I'm constantly working on that battle to combat that. And the more you can get in that battle between you versus you, and the more you win that battle, the more you ingrain that as a habit pattern.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful thing.
I love that we can pretty much guarantee that our brain is lazy.
Yeah, right?
It kind of makes it easy to like prepare for your life. To go like, well, my brain's not going to want to do that, so I'm going to do this X, Y, Z.
Exactly. And then you're ready ahead of time, and then you're better prepared for the fight.
That's so great. That's so great. Well, this has been so fantastic. Your book launches or is released out into the world in October of 2017, and I am really pumped to get my hands on it just because of everything we've already talked about. One of the things that I want to kind of pick your brain in front of everyone, because we already did it a little bit before the interview started, but a lot of us in the Bare Naked Bravery community are creative misfits. We don't quite belong where we are, but we're creative. We love the creative juice of making something and putting something out into the world. And a lot of us deal with fear specifically in putting the thing we've created out into the world.
I get it.
So, I mean, I'm a marketing pro. There's some skills that I've picked up just due to this. Like, I have fear. I'm going to preemptively assume that I'm going to be scared shitless about putting this piece of work out into the world. So I'm going to learn everything I know about copywriting, or positioning your product in the marketplace and all that kind of stuff. So, but in regards to putting your book out into the world, you've already mentioned that it was a little bit scary to write the book. You're in the thick right now, as we were talking about, you're in the thick of it with the launch and the publicity and the media promotion and all of this. Are you scared?
Very. I'm very scared that it will get nowhere. It won't hit the goals I want to. Nobody will buy it. Constantly scared that it won't make traction, So I'm dealing with it regularly. I've definitely clearly with my lifestyle developed a sort of positive relationship to this feeling so I can engage it. But the more you take action, the more you see wins, For example, I was going to Chicago to do a talk. So I just was like, hey, I'm going there anyway. Why don't I pitch some TV stations? I did 2 pitches. I got on 2 TV stations in the 3rd biggest local market in the country. So all of a sudden you start reframing and saying, you know what, when I take action, I see wins and celebrate those wins. It's very important to pause and celebrate the wins. That was something I was actually awful at. I used to just constantly burn myself out because no matter what win I saw, I'm like, it's still never going to get anywhere. So pause, celebrate it, and then say that, okay, things are happening. And am I still scared? Of course. But I'm obviously at this point fairly good at translating fear into action. And I know, I don't know where it's all going to go. All I'm doing is just keep taking one step forward, and you see wins, you see things come in, and that's all you can do. One strategy I didn't mention the LMNOP, but that is really, really valuable, is actually visualize the obstacle standing between where you are and where you want to be. It's far more effective than visualizing the end result. So instead of sort of visualizing yourself happy with millions of dollars or whatever, visualize yourself facing the obstacles. And I do this when I run, for example. I always visualize myself hitting an inevitable low point, and I know I will suffer when I go for a long run, but then I visualize myself overcoming it. So something I do is like, okay, visualizing myself preparing for these interviews, visualizing myself engaging in taking on the task of pitching podcasts, pitching whoever it may be, getting the word out there. But fear is constantly there.
Yeah.
Are people going to buy? What if I sell only 10 books?
I always equate a little bit of that, what you're saying, to, so with my clients and also with my cello students from years ago, we would always talk about the movie Cool Runnings.
Yeah.
Love
that one. Love it.
Such a good movie.
So awesome.
But there's that scene where all the guys are sitting in the bathtub.
Yep.
And they're flipping through the flashcards of all the different curves and turns they're going through. And that's the visualization you're talking about.
Yeah,
they're not sitting in the bathtub envisioning themselves with the gold medal around their neck. They're sitting there with the flashcards envisioning like what it's actually going to feel like to go around that obstacle.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's really powerful differentiation between, because a lot of people in the personal development realm are like, meditate on the way your ideal life is going to look like. And I'm kind of like, no, that sounds like a bunch of baloney.
Exactly. It's far more. I mean, Michael Phelps too. The exact same thing as the movie. He used to visualize himself swimming. So when his goggles got flooded in 2008, he kept swimming and still won Olympic gold.
Yeah.
So keep focused on those obstacles, and then mentally you'll learn to smile through them. And then when they actually happen, you'll be better prepared physically, like in reality, to smile through them. Mm-hmm. So fear won't go away, but it's not a bad thing if it doesn't.
So let's talk a little bit about persistence, because I know that you have got, your book is endorsed by the Dalai Lama, right?
Mm-hmm. That was a huge honor. Very blessed.
Such an honor. How the hell did that happen? Are you guys buddies?
No, started with the pure cold, just absolute cold, didn't have any warm lead there at all. Again, healthy persistence. So it started with, I pitched the cold email on the website, which got me nowhere. And then I did a bunch of research, and I found one point of contact in His Holiness's office, and I reached out to him. I shot a video for His Holiness because that's much more real than just words on a text, right? Seeing me. I shared talking about vulnerability, which is, I know, one of your key factors in the Bare Naked Bravery community, was invaluable. I mean, it's so much more valuable to share your struggles. People want to hear more about your struggles than talk about how awesome you are, right? If I just say, hey, here's why I'm awesome, it's not authentic. It doesn't build connection. So I was very real in this video about sharing my struggles, some of the things we've talked about that brought me to Fearvana. Then sort of 3 point of contacts later, I connected to one monk in the monastery there, kept following up, was very real about my struggles, very real about what I want to do with Fearvana, how we're giving away the proceeds of the book to charity, and that I wanted to serve. So eventually, I think after, it might have taken about 4 or 5 months, eventually I got a message from this monk saying, considering who you are and your story, the struggles you've been through, and your genuine desire to serve, I will press your case. And when he said that, that was obviously a good sign. And 2 weeks later, I got the foreword. And I wasn't even asking for a foreword. I actually just wanted like a one-liner, the endorsement. But I got a foreword, which was even better than I could have ever asked for.
So fantastic.
From His Holiness. So, and part of it also started with the belief that it was possible. Because initially, I was like, you have this thing like it's never going to happen. And suddenly I remember, like, I can't remember exactly, but I kind of remember one day waking up, why can't I reach out why can't I get a foreword from the Dalai Lama? Initially you wouldn't even think that that's possible. You're just like, there's no way, I'm not a known person right now. I'm not uber famous. I don't have contacts. Then I was like, wait, why can't I, And yes, you reach out. It's not always going to work out. I reached out to a lot of people that I did not get endorsements from, but I also got a ton of good ones, And so even if you got 100, put yourself out there 100 times, you might get 20 yeses, but those 20 will be game changing. I mean, the foreword from the Dalai Lama is monstrous, right?
Yeah. Well, I think it just is, it's a testament to that fact that you said earlier, the more action you take, the more you see wins. And if you don't put yourself out there, then you'll never find out whether it's going to work out or not. And in regards to the persistence, I think that's just how things go especially in the media world. Like if you're trying to put your album out or your article that you just wrote or whatever you're trying to publish out into the world, and you're contacting news media outlets or other blogs or other things, everyone is so busy.
Yeah.
So just because they didn't respond to one email doesn't mean that they hate you.
That is a great point. I cannot stress that enough.
They're just busy. They're like, their kid is covered in, mud and is running around the house, and they happen to check your email right at that moment when they're like, oh no.
Yeah.
And then it's out of their mind. So it's okay to ping somebody or to to be persistent with what you're asking for.
Exactly. I mean, we get into our own heads like, oh, they probably hate me. They'll never want to. And I mean, even with the Chicago TV interview, for example, I had pitched the guy, and then I called back, I emailed him, and we actually spoke once, and he said he'd get back to me on a particular date. And he didn't, right? So what? He's busy. Now, in my own head, that could very mean, oh, he's not interested, all that stuff. And then I called back, and he said, oh, so sorry, I wasn't feeling well. Yeah, let's totally book it. And it led to the thing just simply because if I hadn't followed up with that call, it would never have led to that ABC Chicago interview. But part of it, I'm not gonna lie, it showed up in my own head that, oh, he doesn't like me, he's never gonna want to be, all that stuff shows up in your own head. But it's so important to be aware of it, so then you can just not listen to it. So it's okay if it shows up. The point is, you don't have to listen to it, Natural instinct is that stuff will show up. Like you said, with we're going to think that they don't like anything nobody likes me, all that stuff, but whatever. It's okay if it shows up. It's just ignoring it for a second and saying, okay, that might not be true. I don't actually know what's going on in their world. Let me follow up and see what happens,
So maybe if you are trying to put your stuff out there right now and you are facing some of that obstacles, a lot of the obstacles are probably in your brain.
Almost always. Yep. They all start up here. Yep.
Yep. Because if the only thing keeping you from following up with someone and potentially getting a yes is thinking that they don't like you, and you don't know that for sure, you're just investing tons of your energy into worrying about imaginary things. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's not a real great use of time.
Exactly. The mind here can be our greatest enemy or our best ally. It's up to us.
It's totally true, which is a great place to end this. This is so fantastic. Thank you so much for doing this. I really, really love this.
Thank you for having me. It was a real pleasure.
And I can't wait to read the book.
Thanks, Emily. Looking forward to hearing what you think.
So beyond the Bravery bundle, which is always free and available at barenakedbravery.com, your brave takeaway from today's show is this. If you're listening to this before Akshay NANAVATI's book releases in October, go visit fearvana.com. And Akshay has generously offered to give away copies of his book for free. You just have to pay for the shipping. So go ahead and check that website out, fearvana.com. And then I want you also to tell us all about your favorite parts of today's Bare Naked Bravery. You can do that through Facebook, through Twitter, through Instagram. Just make sure that you tag Akshay NANAVATI and myself in it so that both of us can cheer you on. The other thing that you could possibly do is jump into the Bare Naked Bravery Facebook community and share your story and your experience and commonalities or differences with Akshay's stories. So you're invited to come and be part of the community. We would love to have you. To do that, just go ahead and download your Bravery bundle from barenakedbravery.com, and you'll get a link to the Facebook group within your welcome email and within that download email. So fearvana.com and barenakedbravery.com. And that's our show this week. I am so grateful that you took the time to listen to this. It's really important that we do the next step and share the bravery that we experience in the world with other people, and we acknowledge that. So if that means giving us a review and rating the show in your Apple Podcast app, then go for it. If it means telling someone else about this podcast episode who you think might get something out of it, go for it. But it really is important that we share that bravery, because that's why we're doing it. All the bravery that we hear here deserves to be spread as far and as wide as possible, and you are a part of that. If you are digging the music in today's episode, that's because it's brought to you by Lee Rosevere. So go check out his tunes on Bandcamp. He's pretty great. To find out more about all the artists, musicians, and other sponsors of the show, go visit the library over at barenakedbravery.com. There's lots of really good stuff there. I'm really looking forward to being with you next week. So we have some super cool things in store for you. I'm so excited. We have Emily Wapnick coming. Such a great conversation. In the meantime, on Friday, I'll see you in the Peep Show episode. But until then, I have one message for you. It is this: be yourself, be vulnerable, be brave, be imaginative, be intuitive, be improvisational, because the world needs more of your bare naked bravery.